Hello, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you. Thanks for joining. I'm Coles, and I'll be your host for the day. Before we start, a little bit about Bhavan Cybertech. We are a global provider of digital transformation solutions in the areas of predictive analytics, digital supply chain management, and digital experience management through powerful IP products and solutions. A firm believer in connected innovation, Bhavan Cybertech has entered into a strategic partnership with SingleStore, formerly MemSQL. SingleStore is a cloud-native operational database built for speed and scale and redefines the limits of what's possible. Today's webinar is on how to make your dashboards into Fastboards with SingleStore. Over the last many years, dashboards have proliferated in enterprises from the boardroom to the manufacturing line. As businesses have become increasingly more reliant on analytics, end users have started to demand snappier performance from their dashboards. We have with us Jordan Tigani, Chief Products Officer, SingleStore. Welcome, Jordan. Jordan Tigani is responsible for both engineering and product management at SingleStore. He helped create Google BigQuery, co-authored 2 books on the subject, and served in both engineering and PM director roles. He also worked at Microsoft Research and Windows kernel team, in addition to a sprinkling of star-crossed startups. Welcome, Jordan. Very, very excited to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks very much for having me. Can you hear me?
Yes, Jordan.
Okay.
Just before we start,
Sure.
A little bit of housekeeping. Just a few housekeeping rules for the attendees. The webinar will be for an hour. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box in your Zoom control panel. I'll bring them up during the presentation. We'll also have a question and answer session at the end. Also request you all to keep your microphones muted when you're not speaking. Thank you. Over to Jordan now. We're waiting to hear from you, Jordan.
Okay, thanks. No, it's great to be here. Great to get a chance to chat. So I'm going to talk a little bit about to start out with just what is SingleStore, in case folks are not as familiar with it. Then I'm going to talk kind of a little bit about the vision of where we see SingleStore going, and some of the kind of the exciting things that we're currently building, and then focus on dashboarding use cases and kind of talk about how SingleStore can really make your dashboards into Fastboards, which is sorry for making up a word, but I think it kind of captures what we can do. Next slide, please. So what is SingleStore? Next slide. Our mission is really pretty broad. It's one database for all your data and all your workloads. And while this sounds like a huge claim that this is what we can do, it's some of it is aspirational, and some of it is actually sort of based on what we actually see our customers doing. Next slide. So if you look at actually the how SingleStore is being used by our customers, it's across a broad range of use cases for databases, from fraud detection at Bank of America to operational analytics or operational reporting at Carfax, where we replaced Mongo. And this was an interesting one where they were using Mongo for kind of as a document store, but they also needed to be able to build a report off of it. And the report in Mongo was taking tens of hours. And they switched to SingleStore. At the time, it was MemSQL, and that report they were able to build that in only 5 minutes from tens of hours. So that was 2 orders of magnitude faster on the reports, and also the kind of using it as a document store just the pure lookups and the pure updates were actually faster than Mongo. So that's sort of on the operational side, but then kind of also on the data warehousing and the analytical side, we have seen customers augmenting Teradata or even replacing Teradata with memSQL. An interesting one also is Platform 28. They were using Snowflake as their customer data platform, and it was getting really expensive, and it was also slow. And so they benchmarked a bunch of other alternatives, including memSQL. And originally they threw out the results from memSQL because they're like, there's no way it could be that fast. And so they redid the benchmark, and it turns out it actually was that fast. And now memSQL is their customer data platform. Sorry, SingleStore. We just changed the name. We just changed the name from memSQL last week. So I still haven't quite gotten used to calling it SingleStore yet. I'm sure one of these days it will work. Hopefully before we change the name again. Just kidding. We're not likely to change the name again. Anyway, next slide, please. So, we've been able to be quite successful and making our customers successful in a number of different areas. And there's some things that we do really well. ETL processing at Kellogg, at Pinterest was an interesting one where they're doing real-time analytics, dashboarding. So dashboarding is something that tends to come up a lot, and I'm going to be talking about dashboards a little bit later. You can see we're used across a broad range of customers. Next slide. So when should you use SingleStore? So there's a few cases where SingleStore really works well. One is low latency analytics. So if you need to do analytics, and then maybe it's updates or transactions, but maybe it's reports, and a few seconds is too long. memSQL works really well. I worked on Google BigQuery. I helped create Google BigQuery. Google BigQuery has a hard time running queries in under a second. Snowflake is really the same in the same boat. And often people that are migrating from other data warehouses, perhaps they're moving to the cloud, they're modernizing their data warehouse stack. They need things to run, they need things to be interactive, and so memSQL or SingleStore helps really well in those use cases. The other kind of related one is data warehouse augmentation. So you don't necessarily have to use memSQL or SingleStore as your data warehouse. You can use memSQL as a kind of a caching layer in front of your data warehouse to make it work faster. So we have a number of customers that are they're extending the life of their legacy data warehouse, or they're kind of working around some of the problems of their cloud data warehouse by adding memSQL into the mix. One of these days I'll remember to say SingleStore. The other time is when you need to run in a hybrid mode. So you need to run on-prem and in the cloud. Other cloud data warehouses tend to be just in the cloud. Particularly, the one I worked on, BigQuery, is just in Google Cloud, but even Snowflake is only in the three major cloud platforms. So if you want something to run on-prem, you need to find another solution, and so SingleStore is great for that. Another one is fresh analytics, sometimes called real-time insights. I think it's more and more popular these days as people want to be able to understand like what's going on in their business right now, whether that's like real-time inventory tracking or weblog tracking or threat detection or fraud detection. Being able to do analytics on the data that is just happening is really important. And there's two pieces to that are important. You need to be able to get the data in quickly. And so SingleStore is extraordinarily good at that. And I'll talk a bit about that in a couple minutes. But then the other is just being able to quickly analyze the data. And so like traditionally, if reports that are used for analytics can are generated overnight on yesterday's data, and they often take hours to create. And so if it takes hours, it's not really useful for real-time insights. And then the last one is we call it serving path analytics. Is anytime you need high concurrency, SingleStore does extremely well. So often, people will want to have, like, in their public-facing web page, something that'll run a bunch of analytic queries, and typically the databases that are used to serve web traffic are not very good at analytics, and databases that are used, data warehouses that are used for analytics are not very good at doing lots of concurrent operations at once. And so SingleStore does this really well, partly just because it's so fast. So if you can, for instance, if you can, return the results in 1 millisecond, then, you don't even need to be able to do concurrency, and you can do 1,000 queries per second. But SingleStore does well at high concurrency as well as just low latency. Next slide, please. So how do we do this? We have a couple of real architectural advantages, and this actually was what attracted me to the company in the first place. The first one is the technology. Actually, it was originally called SingleStore. That's sort of where we came up with the name. Was our technology that combined really the benefits of an operational end-to transaction or end-to analytic database. So a column store and a row store. So generally your transactional databases use a row-oriented data storage, so that it's easy to look up data, it's easy to update data. Whereas data warehouses use a column store, so it's easy to scan. So MemSQL, we've built sort of a hybrid that combines the best of both. And this, people have actually said for a long time that this is impossible. It's impossible to do it well. And I think we're an existence proof that it is possible. And so I think that's a real advantage that we have on the technology side. And the next big advantage is just that every detail was built for speed. And often when you build a system, and I know because I've built a similar system before, is that if you design to make it sort of either simple architecturally or designed for throughput, it's easy for latency to creep in in a lot of different places. And next thing you know, you have 50 milliseconds here, 100 milliseconds there, and then somebody says, well, why should I bother making this fast and this other thing is slow? And so MemSQL SingleStore was designed so that every millisecond counts, and even microseconds count, and that's really hard to replicate. So you could say, well, why doesn't one of the competitor just focus on making things faster? It's easier to not let the latency in than it is to try to squeeze the latency out. Next slide, please. So this is kind of a crazy slide, but it shows kind of everything coming together at SingleStore. So you have the fast ingest, the way you can get data, you can bulk load data, you can stream data in, you can use Kafka, you can use Spark, you can use transform data with stored procedures, and then you can deploy it on premise, you can deploy it kind of in a managed database as a service, which is our SaaS offering. You can self-host it. You can run it yourself in any cloud you want. You can run it in Kubernetes, et cetera. And then we have a number of different data types and different ways you can actually interact with the data, or different types of queries. So it's a relational database. It's it's fully SQL. It's actually MySQL compatible. But you can run geospatial queries, and more and more data these days actually has a location associated with it. So geospatial is really important. But you can also do full text search like Lucene, inverted index style search, key value, database like Mongo, JSON, which is, like for semi-structured data, and we push the JSON all the way down to the storage layer so that it's super fast. Then also time series, a lot of financial analysis uses time series. And then, so what does that let you do? Kind of on the analytics and the application side, from the fast dashboards, which I'll talk about in a minute, but also fast ad hoc queries, integrations for machine learning, and then you can build your applications on top of it as well. Next slide, please. So I've talked about the fast ingest a bunch of times, but it allows you ingest data from streams. In parallel for bulk loads, we have our a syntax in our SQL that lets you create pipelines, and these are sort of long-lived pipelines that can pull data in from Kafka or other locations. And it gives you strong exactly once semantics, which I think is different than some other systems like this. And it's got native integrations with a number of different systems, including Kafka and S3. Next slide. So just to give an example of how fast this actually is, so we one customer we had was using a trading platform. And they were actually, so they're not just pulling data in, but then they're also scoring machine learning based on that data, and they were doing 10 million of those per second. So it's not just getting data in, but you can also do transformations and complex things like ML scoring. Next slide, please. So I've talked about the sort of our SingleStore. So now that we named the company SingleStore, we had to come up with a new name for the SingleStore storage system. So we call it Universal Storage now. But it's what combines the transactional and the analytical into a single system. So highly compressible. Lets you scan billions of rows, but lets you do kind of normal relational database things like create indexes on it, et cetera. Next slide, please. And then we can connect to lots of different things. So that's one of the really important things, and one of the things that makes it good for dashboards is that if you're running Tableau, if you're running Looker or Power BI, Sisense, or your own custom application that you've built, like we have a JDBC driver, et cetera. SingleStore just works, and it's MySQL wire compatible and SQL compatible and data type compatible. So all the tools that have been built for MySQL over the last 30 years will just work with SingleStore. And next slide, please. One of the things that I think we've done really well at SingleStore is really strong integration with Spark. And so we have a SingleStore Spark connector that allows very, very fast access to data that's in SingleStore, so that if you have a Spark job, maybe you're running your machine learning or your data science is all in Spark, but you want to leverage data that's stored in SingleStore. The SingleStore allows or the connector allows like the push down of a lot of the hard work into the storage engine, into SingleStore, so that you don't have to pull a whole lot of data back. And then we have a high velocity connector, so even if you do have to pull a lot of data back, it's very fast. So it tends to be even faster than if you have the data, if you did it already prepared in Parquet files or something. Next slide. So we have two product offerings really. One is the SingleStore database, which is you can download it, you can install it wherever you want on virtual machines, on bare metal. We have a Kubernetes operator, so if you're using Kubernetes, you can kind of easily deploy that in your Kubernetes cluster. The other one we have is a SingleStore managed service. So this is our database as a service, our SaaS offering, where you just spin up a cluster and go. It's super simple, and we have it. It's on all the three major clouds and also OpenShift. Next slide, please. So just quick delve into the managed storage service overview. Next slide. So it is available in AWS, GCP, and Azure. I think most of our usage is in AWS. I think most of all cloud usage is in AWS. But because the way it was built, we've been able to run on-prem for so long, and on-prem has such a variety of hardware and networking and et cetera. It works equally well across all three clouds. So if you're on Azure, if you're on GCP, MemSQL SingleStore is gonna work. Next slide. And so we have it. It's just one of the things we realized is that people just don't want to manage infrastructure. They don't want to have to manage their database. They don't have to want to worry about what happens when a node goes down, or what happens when they want to scale something up, or what happens when there's a network problem. They want somebody else to deal with that. And so our managed service offering kind of just makes it easier. Lower TCO. Let our SREs handle it for you, and it's overall going to be easier and less expensive and more flexible than running yourself. Next slide. So one of the things that people often worry about is when you're running in a SaaS environment is security. So that's something that we take super seriously. We encryption at rest, encryption on the wire. We have private link, so you can access your VPC, audit logging, etc. to make sure that our customers are even the ones that have significant security requirements are happy running our managed service. Next slide. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about the product vision and kind of where we're going. Next slide, please. So, to start out with, what does SingleStore mean? I talked a little bit about how SingleStore was the technology that unified row and column store, operational and analytic queries together. But SingleStore kind of means more than that, or at least it means more than that to us. It means, we really think that we can be the place, for your data. And I think one of the things that is one of the most complex things in data management is the fact that people have an analytic database and an operational database, and they have to move their data from one to the other. They have to move from operational to analytic. And when they do that, they do either ETL, extract, transform, load, or ELT, they extract, load, transform, in the other database. But when you're doing that, there's just a bunch of stuff that can go wrong. And and when you're moving lots of data around, it's expensive. And you have to worry about security and all sorts of there's network problems, durability, etc. What if instead of that you just did a transform? You just transformed it in place. How much of life would get simpler if you didn't have to move your data? And that's really kind of the goal of SingleStore. And it's aspirational. We realize that it's not. There may be reasons you want other databases now, but we do think that there's a lot of value in just sort of reducing the complexity of your systems, reducing the number of different things, and you don't have to worry about data silos. So all sorts of things get nicer. Next slide, please. So the things that we're investing in, investing in we call it mission critical, making sure that we have all the right security certifications and disaster recovery configurations, et cetera. Like we've invested a lot in that. We're going to continue to invest in a lot. We also are investing in a cloud native experience. So we have a SaaS offering, but we want to make it more kind of feel like something that was born in the cloud. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in another couple of slides. Unified storage, this is our differentiator. So we're going to continue to invest in that. Autonomous, operation, which is just sort of reducing TCO, making it simpler to use, making it easier to manage, is always bring smiles to the faces of our customers. And then the last one is a global data namespace, and this one is it's part of the cloud native, and it's part of the kind of the single store vision. Is if you want to be the single store, then you want to make sure that people don't have to worry about moving data. And a lot of people have data that is in multiple locations. They have data that's on-prem, they have data that's in AWS, they have data that's in Azure. According to Gartner, 80% of enterprises have data in more than one cloud. And often it's because somebody spun something up in some place, or your analytics are in some place, and your logging gets done to someplace else. And with SingleStore, one of the things that we're building is the ability to have one global namespace, or where you basically can say, you can add constraints to your data. So you might say, this data has to stay in Singapore, or this data has to stay in Australia. This data has to stay in the AWS, and then we will obey those constraints. But if you don't have the constraints, you can basically mount a database from one location to another location. We'll handle the data movement under the cover, so it's just invisible to you. And so, like moving from migrating from on-prem to the cloud is just as simple as you remove the data constraint that says your data doesn't have to stay on-prem anymore. Next slide, please. So our cloud native, our V2 that I was kind of talking about is the key thing that it has is separation of storage and compute. So the current architecture has the database nodes store the data with an offsite backup, of course, but it does mean that kind of the compute is the storage is kind of limited to what is local. And so when you separate that out, when you use the object storage as your canonical data location, then you can do all sorts of interesting things. Like you can spin up and down clusters. You can rescale clusters very, very easily. A bunch of kind of really interesting things come up, and that's actually a key part of how our global namespace is going to work. Pay for what you use. Being able to say, I want to spin up a cluster of a certain size, and then after people go home, I'll spin it down again, and that also becomes possible. And the global namespace is all incorporated. And the next slide, please. Just to give kind of an example of how it's going to look, is that you'll be able to say, you have one workload, one user that spins up a cluster, is operating on one database. Another user spins up a cluster, can operate on that same database, but maybe it's a different size cluster because they don't need much concurrency. They don't do as much. And then each one of those can just shut down when they're not being used. Next slide. So this is sort of like, this is global store, and this is sort of actually one step beyond global store, which is, a single control plane. So, our managed service, runs on the three major at least the three major US based clouds. And but also, we'll be able to manage, have the exact same interface to manage your instances that also run on-prem or on a private cloud. So no data will be sent up to the cloud, but basically the management plane is going to be in the cloud. So everything will just work the exact same way. Next slide. All right, so now on to the Fastboards. Next slide, please. So I think people who do a lot of dashboarding, they tend to realize that that as much as these dashboarding tools, these BI tools advertise being really fast, over time, or when data gets complex, you end up sitting around waiting a lot of the time. Even at Google, where you'd think that we have a really good data infrastructure, in order for me to understand what revenue was for the last month for my product, it took a minute for that dashboard to load. Like, that's just really unconscionable. If I wanted to drill down on something, I wanted to look at a specific segment, a specific country, and their usage there, that took another minute. And so you basically it became not useful. Hit next, please. So the backend infrastructure really is struggling. Next slide, please. So the kind of the root of the challenge is that is a couple things. One is the legacy databases, like the operational databases are not really designed for analytics, and so they're not going to be fast. Or or you have new data sources, so you're streaming data in, and the data is coming in kind of too fast for your database to keep up. Or if it does keep up, then it slows everything down. Like sometimes, with most column store databases, the faster you write data, the slower it is going to be to read, because the new data has not been optimized. This happens in Snowflake. It happens to some degree in BigQuery. And then kind of new databases that are, they're purpose built for specific types of dashboards, but they often don't scale very well. Because, for instance, most BI tools have their own built-in accelerated query engines, but they're generally not distributed, and so they only can contain what you can fit on a single machine. Next slide, please. So SingleStore, is a new SQL database, and it can accelerate your dashboards. I talked about sort of the converged platform. With one table type, you don't have to do much tuning, and it just works, and it was built for speed. And concurrent data access, concurrent user access, which is the other area that often data warehouses causes data warehouses to fall over. Next slide. So SingleStore for Fastboards, and there's a bunch of great use cases. I've kind of described these a little bit before, but one is real-time analytics. What's going on right now, what's happening in my business right now. Operational BI where you're actually, you want to see what are my orders right now, what are the things in progress, what are the things in flight, what are the what are the transactions that are currently happening. You want to have your operational database be able to be reactive, but then you also want to be able to see what are the trends. and be able to relate those trends to kind of what is happening in the past. To give one example, I was working with the chief data officer of a European railroad, and he's like, I want to see what's going on in my system right now. I want to see, I've got all these not only trains but sensors and queues and machines, and and that information is only interesting when you kind of compare it to what it usually is, at that time of day, that time of year, and that's the kind of thing that where the kind of the marriage of operational and analytics really shines. Historical reporting is you want to see what's happening over time. How is this related to how things have been? And then machine learning driven analytics, like we can, as I kind of was alluding to earlier, you can do ML scoring as you're writing data into MemSQL. You can integrate it with your Spark pipelines. And then also ad hoc data discovery. You want to be able to do drill downs. You want to be able to find what are the interesting things in your data. And in order to be able to do that, it's got to be interactive. I was mentioning the case at Google where it took me a minute to load my dashboard and a minute to do any drill down. So I never did any drill down. So I was really not able to do much ad hoc data discovery. Next slide, please. Next slide. So, legacy architectures, just tend to be built for batch, and so the data is not going to be particularly fresh because you've got your ETL processes that run every day, and then you're talking to things like Hive and HBase, which are really not designed for low latency. So you kind of have data is stale and it's not particularly fast. Next slide. So other types of legacy architectures that are doing streaming, you may have a Kafka stream, you may have a CDC stream from your SQL Server instance. Those all go into a legacy database. It goes into the legacy database, and you have the same latency problem when you're loading your dashboards. Next slide. And then the kind of the newer systems, newer databases, either Mongo or Snowflake, et cetera, like those also just have a hard time with low latency. Like Snowflake has a hard time running high concurrency or queries under a second. BigQuery, the same thing. Redshift has a hard time with concurrency. Mongo is really not designed for analytics at all, et cetera. So, the kind of the existing systems often lead to kind of poor performance. Next slide. So what does MemSQL do? What does SingleStore do? Next slide. We have, we've demonstrated in a number of customers that that we will increase your dashboard speed, and it doesn't matter what whether you're using Tableau or Power BI or Sisense or Spotfire. Our SingleStore is great at speeding up the loading speed of your dashboards, the number of users you can run against the dashboard, and just like how fresh, so this is an example of an event happens and within 30 seconds it shows up in your dashboard, and that's their SLA, and generally it can be much faster. Next slide. So those other diagrams were very lots of boxes. SingleStore is much more complex, or sorry, much more simple. You can sit SingleStore on top of your other databases as an augmentation, and then you can run your data consumers and your dashboards on top of SingleStore. Next slide. So yeah, you get the fast ingest. As I mentioned, that's kind of the first part of the of real-time analysis. Hit next. Then we got the universal storage. Next slide. Next. Yeah, there we go. And so, why SingleStore? So, as I mentioned, you can, it's great for extending other systems. So, I talked a bit about like you can use it to complement Snowflake or BigQuery to work around some of their limitations. We also see people using it to extend Oracle. So, like one example was a payment processor that was using SingleStore because Oracle was taking too long to commit each transaction, and so they write it first to SingleStore, and then in the background they batch that to Oracle, and then they also run their dashboard off of SingleStore because it's great for analytics at the same time. And then next slide. And then they can run, Fastboards can run anywhere. On the major clouds or against all of the major BI tools. And I was going to run a demo at this point, but I was having trouble getting Zoom to be able to present, which is why I'm not actually presenting my slides. So you can just imagine me running a Kafka, 100,000 rows per second smart meter, and then showing some dashboards on Zoom data. But alas, I don't have that. I don't have that ready. So you'll just have to imagine it. Next slide then. So you can try the SingleStore managed service for free. If you just go to singlestore.com/manage-service, or just go to singlestore.com and click around, you can get to our $250 in free credits, which means you can basically run the smallest size cluster for a month for free. There's also, SingleStore has a free tier, so you can actually you can download the software and run it for free. And you can run that for free forever. And then if you like it, you can use it more and pay us for it. But we our goal is to make it usable. And and so if you're using a small use case for BI, you can generally do it for free. Next slide. And that's it. Thanks very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Jordan. Coles here. So that was a very clear and very detailed presentation. Thank you for sharing that with us. So before we go into questions, we would like to announce that Bhavan Cybertech will be rolling out special offers for the Fastboards. We shall be reaching out to all our customers on this. If you're interested, you may also write to us at info@bhavancybertech.com. Okay, so let's go ahead and take some time for questions now. So first things first, Jordan, from MSQL to SingleStore. I know the transition is still happening, and we are still warming up to the new brand. It's like how we change the names of cities. We still tend to like the former name. So how has the transition been? And it was very happy to see you punctuate your transition with a lot of humor and a lot of smiles. So how has the transition been? What were the risks you had to take, and what challenges you faced? Because it's a big thing.
It is a big thing, and you always worry that that it's you lose all your people won't recognize that this is they'll hear, they might have heard you did the transition, but then when they hear of SingleStore, they have no associations with it. So you kind of have to build up from scratch. But I think the reason that we did it was because we were called MemSQL, and memSQL just really wasn't what our product was. And so many people, because memSQL sounds like it's just an in-memory database, and you may not even persistently store the data, and I think we were, that was hurting us because people were kind of dismissing us when for use cases that we would work really well. And so we kind of thought long and hard, and I think sometimes that if you get the right name, it just works. And I think that the SingleStore name, I think partly because it kind of came from bottom up, and it came from the internal technologies. A bunch of us were just like, yeah, that would work. That, because that not only describes what we think we can do, but where we want to go in the future, and can even help us kind of guide, which new features should we add. Well, is this going to help us get to the SingleStore vision, or not? And if it's not, then maybe we don't add those features. But it's been a hard transition. Like, I was searching for like SingleStore pricing today, and Google hasn't quite indexed that yet, and so there's always going to be some things that are going to be slower to adapt, like LinkedIn jobs for SingleStore are not, like, they're not connected correctly yet. So if you're interested in a job at SingleStore, you might have to dig a little bit deeper. So there's certainly risks, but we thought that the rewards and the increased scope of what we were trying to do, was not served well by our old name, and so we made the transition.
Okay, great. So just a reminder to all our attendees, you may type in your questions on your Zoom control panel. So talking about Google Index, and that brings us to another question, Jordan. So you helped create Google BigQuery, and you co-authored 2 books on the subject. So tell us more about that.
I guess it was about 10 years ago, and our site director at the time in the Seattle office. The Seattle office at the time was only like, it was 100 people, and now it's 7,000 people. And Google Cloud didn't really exist. Google Cloud was a team called Nebula in the Seattle office, and so, like, the people next to us were starting Compute Engine and then cloud storage. Like, they were all in the same floor of a relatively small building. And we were asked by our site director to create a data marketplace. And so we thought about it, and we're like, well, when you have large data, you don't want to have to move data. And so, like, this has been a theme, I think. Don't move your data. Move your compute to the data rather than the data to the compute, because just large data sets are really hard to move. And so, if you want to have a data marketplace, you need to be able to compute on the data. And so, we've got this great internal query engine at Google called Dremel. Let's build that as a service, and then eventually we'll get to building a data marketplace. And so, it's 10 years later, they still haven't built the data marketplace yet. But it was really exciting to go from sort of, from zero to, what's now quite a large service.
Okay, thank you. So the next question: how easily does SingleStore work with TIBCO Spotfire? So this is from Anish, actually. Yeah.
So that's a great question. As far as I know, it works very well. Many of the executives from SingleStore are former TIBCO executives, and so they spend a lot of their time building and selling Spotfire, actually in particular. And so I believe it works really well, but I've not actually tried it myself. So interested to hear your experiences. But I think because we have such good connectivity, that it should just work well. And if it doesn't, please let us know. We're very interested in solving these things and fixing them, because this whole dashboard fastboard thing that we're working on, it requires us to work really well with your dashboarding tools. So we'd love to hear if you encounter any problems.
That's great. Thank you. So moving on to the next question. Is SingleStore still based on SQL? And I'm adding another question to it. What data sources does SingleStore work with?
Sure. So it's SingleStore. The language that you talk to SingleStore is SQL. And I think, 15 years ago or so, there was like this kind of NoSQL movement where everybody decided that that actually the constraints of SQL meant that it was really hard to build something that was fast. And so you had things like, you had Bigtable, which was HBase, and then you had Mongo and Cassandra, and I think that then there was kind of a new wave of things that said, well, actually, if you kind of build on some of these strong distributed systems principles, then you can actually have the SQL, the relational bit that you want, as well as but you don't have to sacrifice the performance. And so I think SingleStore and MemSQL was really kind of one of the first that showed that this is really possible, and it's possible to do kind of at scale, and it's possible to do well. Now, you may also be referencing the fact that MemSQL was based on MySQL, and so in the early days was a fork of MySQL to build to do in memory. And then they realized that, okay, if we want to sell this, we need to build it ourselves. And so they did a clean room reimplementation of MySQL, and so that's sort of, and then so MemSQL has really evolved, but they've kept the compatibility with MySQL, just because so many things are built to talk to MySQL. And so in terms of what data sources does it support? I mean, so Kafka, HBase, HDFS, S3, MinIO, Azure Object Storage. There's a bunch of them. And if there's any that are missing, please let us know. There's also a bunch of, we have data integration partners that can help you move your data from one location to another.
Thank you. So there's another question. How does SingleStore compare to a legacy database?
So I was a storage guy. My background is in engineering, and I think a lot of the interesting differences between databases are how the data is stored. So kind of most legacy databases, they tend to store data as B trees or B plus trees or some variation of that reduces. It's designed to reduce disk seeks. And I don't know if these days, most people have their laptops. There's no spinning disk. There's no seek time. And so the data structures that were designed to be fast and to kind of, they were optimized around a constraint that's not really a constraint anymore. And so and yes, in large servers, you do still have spinning disks, but you also have, SSDs are becoming much more common and much more popular. And you can sort of manage the storage tier. You can manage kind of the storage hierarchy, with memory. There's, you have with Optane now, and large memory systems, and then you have SSD, and then you have object storage, which is durable storage. So if you're kind of smart about how you place the data, you can move the data in a way that they can be much faster than the legacy system. So that's, I guess it's a long-winded way of saying that memSQL uses kind of different storage techniques than most legacy, well, than all legacy databases. And and it's the other thing is the way it does distributed transactions and distributed operations is very different than most legacy databases, because many legacy databases, they're designed to be a single box database. And then somebody said, all right, I'm going to come up with a hack and I'm going to make this thing work on 10 machines. And so what they did is they ran basically the same thing on those 10 machines, and they had a little bit that kind of tied it all together. But it wasn't really designed to be distributed. It was, and so certain types of things become really difficult. And because memSQL / SingleStore was really designed at the outset to be distributed, it handles kind of the complex queries much better than some of the other databases that have a distributed version of them, but they weren't necessarily designed that way.
Thank you.
And Redshift is a perfect example.
So we have another question.
Sure.
So the best thing about SingleStore is, we can start off just like that. So it's quick to start off with SingleStore. Where can SingleStore be deployed? Do you want to talk about how quick it is to, adapt to SingleStore?
Sure. So it can be deployed. It can be deployed. It can be deployed on-prem. You can deploy it. You can download it and run it. You run it in your Kubernetes cluster. You can run it on your cloud. It can take a little while to get it up and running. Just if you're deploying it and you're running it in a distributed fashion, and you want to run it in production, it's just you have to manage several nodes. There is a Docker instance that you basically can run sort of SingleStore in a box to kick the tires and get started with it. And then the other thing is the managed service is just super easy. The managed service, you click a couple buttons, you hit deploy, and in 3 minutes later, you've got a fully functional cluster.
Great. So we'll take one last question. What are the typical challenges enterprises have when they transition to SingleStore? I know we have covered it, but since the question has come up, would you like to talk more about it?
Migration is always hard, and I think that people have particular ways they're doing things and particular apps that they're using. I think because SingleStore is based on MySQL, it helps a lot because it's such a well understood ANSI compatible SQL dialects. But even though there's a standard, all SQL dialects are subtly different, and all databases have things that are going to be slow on one and not on the other, and that can be surprising. And so sometimes just the transition can be difficult. Now, if you're moving from so sometimes people they're using MySQL, and MySQL they're finding their MySQL is not scaling well enough. That's a super easy transition. Postgres, people have the same issue. That's an easy-ish transition. But then Teradata or something, or Oracle, where you have a whole bunch of Oracle apps that can be painful. We do have partners that we work with that can help with that, either system integrator partners or data integration partners that can help with the data movement and scaling.
Okay, thank you. So there's one last question, last but not the least. This is more from the organizing team. Have you cast your vote?
Yes, I voted 2 weeks ago. I made sure
That's
I did
great.
that immediately.
I know you guys have a big day coming, so we just wanted to ask
Yes,
that.
yes, this is going to be a very stressful next 24 hours or so, but hopefully it's everything is over quickly, and then everybody can take a deep breath again.
Okay, thank you, Jordan. Thank you for being here. It was very nice having you here. It was a very detailed and very knowledgeable session. And we actually like the way you, as I mentioned, punctuated it with your humor and your smile.